we need to really move into action in translating the potential into concrete development outcome through industrialization. And in doing that, there are a lot of opportunities that Africa can take advantage of when we keep on exporting primary commodities, adding value chain to those primary commodities, especially agriculture and the extractives, will be the linchpin of industrialization in Africa.
I like a word you use there, outcomes. Really, really important part of, setting an agenda, pushing the drive for industrialization. Now, I'd like you to speak to the area of policy and the importance of that, in creating the right, for 54 countries in Africa, and each of them with different comparative advantage. So how can they drive policy, to push this, to bring the desirable outcomes that they need?
The first thing is to do what we call policy harmonization across African countries, which will be quite challenging in achieving. But essentially, what is really interesting about industrialization is that we need to look at the specific country context. And on the basis of this, it will be good for us to really move ahead. But one strong policy that is going to help industrialization in Africa is looking at the credit policy. Because if you look at what is happening in Europe, Asia, North America, as well as Africa, the gap between Africa and the rest of the world is too high. As you can see, countries like Malawi, countries like Zambia and Madagascar, the lending rate is as high as 45%, whereas in Europe, it's less than 6%. In Asia, less than 6%. And even in North America, it's within the same range. You want to compare it with the cost of credit of 45%, and in some situation, in about 2 years ago, it went as high as 60% in Madagascar. So with that kind of lending rate, it's difficult for you to achieve any industrialization.
What would you recommend to fix this then?
Well, the role of the central bank becomes critical, because you have to play a strong role of de-risking the investment climate. We have a few countries that have succeeded in creating what we call credit guarantee scheme for small-scale enterprises and industrial enterprises, where they say, okay, we give you a lending rate of single digit, that is less than 10% or below, where the government will carry the balance, the gap between that rate and the market rate. That is de-risking the investment climate. And the government needs to do that through the central bank. Unfortunately, the Francophone countries do not have central bank. And that's where the challenge is. But it's good for us to set the pace so that those that have central bank should be able to de-risk the environment. And at the same time, international financial institutions like African Development Bank, World Bank, Islamic Development Bank should help in de-risking the investment environment in Africa so that the policy will be conducive for industrialization.
Some will argue that even if all this is put in place, some of the countries in Africa lack the political will and the fiscal discipline to see this drive go through. What do you have to say to this?
What is key in all countries that have really achieved industrial transformation is political will. A few countries have initiated the process of making sure that that will is there. A few countries have already put in place local content policy. Local content policy is if foreign direct investment is coming, you don't just allow them to bring any input, whether it's labor or even raw materials that you can create internally. You don't allow them to bring it from outside. Otherwise, you are decapitalizing your own economic base. So what they do is that they create local content policy where everybody contributes to it. And one thing that is very important is adding value. You have to make a concrete policy action where the political will of both the public and the private sector will be very strong, where you then say, okay, we want to add a minimum of certain, percentage of value to a particular raw material. And that's what countries are doing, especially in December 2013. For the first time in Botswana, they started adding value to diamond, where the sorting and polishing of diamond was taking place in the country, in Botswana. And since then, it has created thousands of jobs, and thousands of small-scale enterprises have risen on the basis of that. And that's the kind of transformation we are looking for. Once you add to that, for instance, if you take cocoa, for instance, you add 5% value to raw cocoa, it's going to increase profit by not less than 25%. So if you look at the kind of income that is going to be generated, additional jobs that is going to be generated, and some kind of multiplier is going to generate across all other sectors, then we're talking about using it to propel the economic growth and transformation in any country where it is done. So the strong political will from both the public and the private sector is very important.
So finally, I'd like you to speak to this important part, which is financing. Who should lead this? Should Africans lead financing? Should we rely more on the DFIs, the development finance institutions like the World Bank? Should we rely on the private sector investment? Or what's the best mix for you to say, to drive this drive for industrialization?
When it comes to the issue of industrialization, a single source of financing cannot do the job. What we need is a kind of combined effort of both the international financial institutions, the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, and other actors, including the private sector, to put their heads together in mobilizing resources. And on the basis of this, there are the risking environment that will come from what we call overseas development assistance. There will be one that will come in the form of other grants. And there will be some form that will come in the form of what they call the private market rates, issuance of bonds and the like. And one thing that really thrills me is what Ethiopia did. Ethiopia, as we speak, is constructing the largest dam in Africa through diaspora's bond alone. When they initiated the project, they went to the World Bank. The World Bank said, oh, certain conditions need to be met. And the country said, sorry, if you are not willing to do it, then we do it through the diaspora's bond. And they succeeded in building the largest dam as we speak in Africa. So this is kind of thing we say, well, we need blended financing to really promote industrialization in Africa, because no single partner will be able to deliver on industrialization without the combined effort of partners involved.